Hello everyone, in this video we're going to go over how to cast variables, which is just a way of saying how to change a variable of one type into a different type. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I'm only going to show you really one today, but my goal with this video is that you'll understand the process well enough that you can kind of help yourself. If I went over all the different ways of casting variables, it would take a whole lot of very long, very boring videos. So again, we're just going to try and cover some of the common pitfalls that can happen whenever you're casting variables, and I'll try and go over, or I'll mostly go over the most common one you'll find, which is converting a string to some sort of number, integer or double, so that you can manipulate it. So here I have a string declared. It's called myString, and we've set that equal to 20 and some other stuff. And let's go ahead and look at our first line here. So what I've done here, this is just hopefully a reminder for you guys, but if it's not, that's fine. Strings are really just an array of characters, and so you can treat it just like that. So we've got my string, and I'm using it here, and I'm treating it just like an array. I've got square brackets, and then I've got a location that I'm passing in. And if you'll remember that array start, first location is location 0, so this 3 is actually referring to the fourth item in the array. And if we start counting here, 0, 1, 2, and 3. So this should print out our S here, our capital S. So let's go ahead and build and run this and make sure it's working. Yeah, sure enough, it works. So that's one way to access a character in a string, and that'll be helpful here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out. Go ahead and move on to our next section of code here. Here we've got we're declaring an integer, calling it myInt. And then here's where we're going to do our first cast. So we're using this command, stoi, and this stands for string to integer. There's other commands. There's also string to double. You can go backwards. You can go from a double or an integer to a string. And there's plenty of other commands that you can find. So stoi here takes one argument, and we're just passing in the name of our string that we want to convert to an integer. Now this is kind of odd because we see that we've got a number, but we've also got a lot of other characters. So if this works, first of all, let's just try it out. Let's just see if it works. Looks like it does. Reads in our 20. But we need to know what exactly this is doing. So what if we had some stuff before the 20? Would this work? And build and run it, and we see that it doesn't actually work. So the way the stoi works is that it starts at the very beginning of your string, and it is reading in and it's looking for a valid input. So it wants to convert something to an integer, so it's looking for an integer, and when it finds other characters before that, it just stops there. It doesn't keep going. It's not smart enough to look for the integer, so it's going to stop. However, if you have just white space, it will read past that. So what stoi does is it skips white space and it looks for an integer. And then once it finds an integer, it reads in until it gets an invalid character. So example of an invalid character, if we had a space here and then we had 30, that space is going to be an invalid character. And what it's going to do, it's going to stop as soon as it finds an invalid character. Now if there is no space here, it's going to keep reading in and keep going. Now there's another command that we mentioned briefly, string to double. So if this were, say, 20.4, for example, it's still going to stop here because that period is invalid. But if we did stod, which just stands for string to double, and we tried that, it's not going to work still because I'm declaring an integer. So we're going to declare a double here, and then let's try that. 20.4. See, it works there. So it does the same thing. stod works the same way as string to integer. It skips white space, looks for integers, and then reads in until it gets an invalid character. Now if you've got multiple points here and some more numbers, it's also still going to stop because as soon as it reads this period, that's an invalid input. So string to integer and string to double can be kind of useful, but you just have to remember that the first thing that comes in here has to be either white space or a valid input for the function, which can be a little tricky if you're doing user input and stuff like that. A user might put the wrong character first, for example. So let's look at some of this code down here now. Uncomment this out. Here I've got a string declared, MJ info, Michael Jordan, number 23. So here we've declared an integer and we've called it mj underscore number, and it equals string to integer. And then here I'm using a new command that we haven't talked about, dot substring. What dot substring does is it takes part of a string, and here we're choosing to declare it. The same with stoi and stod is that you don't have to actually set this equal to anything. You could just use this if you're trying to cast something to an integer type, and it's wherever you're putting this is expecting an integer. It'll work for you. You won't necessarily have to set it equal to some variable. But what dot substring does is it takes two arguments, and the first argument it takes is the location you want it to start at, to take part of this string and create a new substring. So I counted before the video, and if I'm correct, 16 should be this 2 right here. So that should be the 17th item in this string. And then the second argument it takes is how many characters you want it to read in. So we told it to start at 16 and told it to read in 2 characters. So if I'm correct, this should start at 2 and should read in 2 characters, so it should print out 23. That's what should be, what should be saved at mj underscore number, and then we printed it out. So let's just go ahead and test this out and see if it works. Sure enough, it works. So this can be useful, but part of the reason I am showing this is because whenever you're reading in a lot of data and you've got some large file, you have to be careful because there might be some irregularities in your data. If there was just an extra space in here, for example, that would be almost impossible to see. And if we try and run it, it's not going to run. It's going to throw an error because it's starting at location 16, which is this ampersand, or I'm sorry, but yeah, this number sign, and it's not a valid character, and so it throws an error. Also, something of note is if you're missing a space, and in this case, it's starting at the 3, and we're telling it to go for 2 spaces, but it still doesn't throw an error. And so this is also something you have to be careful, because this is almost worse, because if it throws an error, you know you did something wrong. If it doesn't throw an error and gives you what is a valid output, then you might not know until you're getting wrong information out of your code. So that's one of the things to be careful when you're trying to use these dot substring and when you're trying to pull numbers out of a string. So in future videos, we'll talk about string stream and some better ways to do this whenever you're reading a lot of data. I just wanted to show you some of the, again, hopefully some of the pitfalls and some of the things you want to look out for whenever you're using, if you're casting variables using stoi, stod, and those kind of things. So we'll pick this up in the next video.